Remember how a whole city could have a smell of its own? Not a bad one, a warm one. Malt and hops rolling out of 4 great breweries night and day, hanging over the streets and the rooftops, so that the whole town smelled always, faintly, like something good was being made. And do you remember a corner tavern on very nearly every corner? The working man's parlor, with a couple of bowling lanes tucked in the back, and the ball game on the radio over the bar. Because there was a ball game. There was a brand new ball club in that town, and the whole city had fallen so hard in love with it that folks could scarcely talk about anything else all summer long. I'm Henry. Welcome to sweet old America. Today we're going back to Milwaukee, Wisconsin, in the summer of the 1950s. Back when this was the beer capital of the world and about the happiest, most German city in all America. When the bratwurst went into a pan of beer and onions long before it ever saw the grill. When the custard stand had a line clear down the block on a hot night, and Friday meant a fish fry, and the lake breeze came up off Michigan to cool the whole town down. It was, for one decade, just about as whole and as happy as an American city ever got. And nobody sitting out at that ballpark on a warm night with a cold beer in his hand and the crowd roaring around him had the least idea what that town was about to lose. So pour yourself something cold and find your chair. If this old town is yours too, stay with us, subscribe, and we'll walk the whole country back together. Let's go find Milwaukee while the beer's still running and the Braves are still ours. So let's start with the smell, because that's what folks remember first, and it's the thing that hits you before you've even opened your eyes. Malt, hops. That warm, sweet, bready, slightly sour smell of grain cooking, rolling out of 4 great breweries that ran night and day and never once stopped, drifting over the rooftops and down the streets and in through every open window in the summer, so that the whole city smelled faintly, always, like something good was being made. Some mornings it was strong enough to lean on, some mornings it was just a hint on the air. But it was always there. And every soul who ever grew up in that town will tell you the same thing. They can still smell it. 60 years gone, and they can still smell it. That was Milwaukee. That's where we're starting. Because this was the beer capital of the world, and it did not say so modestly. 4 great breweries, Schlitz, Pabst, Miller, Blatz, with their brick castles and their stacks and their own beer gardens. And one of them had a slogan that the entire country knew by heart, that got said on the radio and printed on every bottle and painted on the side of barns from here to California. Schlitz, the beer that made Milwaukee famous. Think about that a minute. A whole city known around the world, famous for its beer. And the town wore that like a crown. And it was true besides. And no other city in America has ever had a thing quite like it. A product, an honest working product, that its whole identity was built on, and that it was flat out proud of, top to bottom, from the brewery owner and his mansion, to the fellow on the bottling line, to the kid on the corner. And the beer wasn't only a business there. It was a whole way of being. The breweries kept their own beer gardens, great shady places out under the trees, with the long tables and a bandstand, where on a Sunday afternoon the whole family went, the grandfather and the babies and all. And the band played, and the men drank their beer, and the children ran loose. And nobody thought a thing about it, because that is what a beer garden was. A family place. That was the German idea, and the Germans had built this town. They had a word for it, Gemütlichkeit, and there's no good English for it. Warmth, coziness, good cheer among your own. The feeling of a long table and a full glass and the people you love, and nowhere else on earth you have to be. And they built that word right into the city, into the beer gardens, into the Turner halls where the old gymnastic societies drilled and argued and sang, into the singing societies where the men met of a Thursday night to sing the old songs in the old language. A whole city organized, quietly, around the notion that life is meant to be enjoyed in company. There are worse ideas to build a town on. Now that city ran in neighborhoods, and you have to understand that or you'll never understand the place. Not districts, not zones, neighborhoods, real ones, each one a village. There was the German North Side, and the Polish South Side, and the Italian Third Ward, and Bronzeville up on Walnut Street, where Black Milwaukee lived. And each one had its own church, with its own steeple you could see from anywhere in it, its own butcher and baker, its own corner tavern, and, this is the part that's gone now, its own tongue. You'd hear German in the shops on the north side and Polish on the south. Real German and real Polish, spoken by grandmothers who'd come over on a boat and never quite needed to learn much else, because the whole world they required was right there in 6 blocks. A person could be born, baptized, schooled, married, employed, and buried inside about a square mile, among people who knew his grandfather. That was a normal life in that town. That was how it was built. The Polish South Side was its own country entire, street after street of it, the little frame houses set close together, and a thing they called the Polish flat, where a family would jack the whole house up off the ground and build another flat underneath it, and rent that out, or put the in-laws in it, because you did what you had to do and you kept your people close. And over all of it, visible from miles across those flat streets, the great domes and towers of the Polish churches, built enormous, built beautiful, built by working people out of their own thin wages, because the church was the one thing you did not economize on. The weddings down there went on for 2 days. The food was pierogi and kielbasa, and the sweet fried ribbons at Christmas. The old women wore their kerchiefs and spoke Polish at the butchers, and their grandchildren answered them in English, and both of them were understood. And every one of those neighborhoods, German or Polish or Italian, ran on the same handful of shops on the same handful of corners. The butcher, with his sawdust floor and the house sausage he'd made in the back that morning. The bakery, and oh, the bakery, the rye bread with the caraway, the hard rolls the whole city ate, the kringle and the coffee cake and the poppy seed things, and the smell of it hitting the street at 6 in the morning like a blessing. The corner grocer who carried you on the book till payday and never once mentioned it. The hardware man, the shoe repair, the fish market on a Thursday getting ready for Friday. Every one of them owned by somebody who lived upstairs or around the corner, every one of them knowing your family by name, and not one of them more than a walk away. You did not get into a car to buy a loaf of bread. You didn't have to. The whole world came to your corner. And down by the river, tucked in between the downtown and the lake, was the Third Ward, the Italian quarter, close-packed and loud and warm, where the families had come over from Sicily and the south and made a whole village out of a few blocks. The produce came through there, the commission houses, the vegetable men with their wagons and later their trucks, and the whole ward smelling of tomatoes and garlic and the river. There was a little church at the heart of it that the ward had built with its own hands and its own coins. The grandmothers had the sauce on by 9 on a Sunday, and the smell of it came out every window at once. It was the smallest of that city's villages, and one of the warmest. And every one of them, the German North, the Polish South, the Italian Ward in Walnut Street up on the near North Side, was doing the very same thing in its own tongue, holding on to the old country with the one hand and building America with the other. And at the heart of every one of those neighborhoods, the true main street of the place, the thing there was more of in Milwaukee than in very nearly any city in America, was the corner tavern. Not a bar, a tavern. There was one on very nearly every corner, and sometimes two, and they were not places for getting drunk so much as places for being a person among your people. The working man's parlor, they called it, and that's exactly what it was. He'd come off his shift at the brewery or the foundry or the tannery and stop in at the corner on his way home, and there'd be the same fellows on the same stools, and the barkeep who knew what you drank before you'd got your hat off. There'd be a free lunch laid out on the bar, the sausage and the cheese and the rye bread and the pickled things, because a tavern that fed you sold more beer, and the arithmetic worked out for everybody. There'd be a dark wooden back bar with a mirror, and the brewery's own name on the sign outside, and the ball game on the radio over the counter, and a shuffleboard, and, we'll get to this, a couple of bowling lanes tucked in the back. The tavern was where you heard the news, argued the politics, got the job, met the girl, mourned the dead, and celebrated the baby. It was the neighborhood's living room, and there were thousands of them. Thousands. It's hard to credit now, but that town had more taverns for its size than very nearly any city in America, and a great many of them were owned outright by the breweries. A tied house, they called it. Schlitz's Tavern or Blatz's Tavern, the name right there on the sign, pouring the one brand and nothing else. And they were as much club as saloon. There'd be a shuffleboard down one wall, sand on the wood, the discs sliding and clacking all evening long. There'd be a card game in the back. There'd be some lodge or league or benevolent society meeting upstairs on a Tuesday. On a Sunday after Mass, the men would come in still in their good suits for the one beer before dinner, with the church bells still going outside. And the barkeep knew everything and told nothing, and was, in his way, half the neighborhood's priest and half its banker, and would carry a man on the tab clear through a layoff without ever once being asked. And here's a thing that will make some of you laugh out loud, remembering. They'd send the kid. Before supper, on a warm evening, your father would hand you a tin pail, a growler, and a few coins, and send you down to the corner tavern to have it filled with beer and carry it home for him. Rushing the growler, they called it. And you'd walk in, a boy of 9 or 10, and the barkeep would fill that pail off the tap and cap it and hand it back over the bar and never think a thing about it. And you'd carry it home careful as a chalice through the summer evening, trying not to slosh, with the foam coming up under the lid, past all the neighbors on their stoops. Try to imagine sending a child down to a bar for a pail of beer today. But it wasn't a bar. That's what folks don't understand now. It was the corner. It was your people. And nothing on God's earth would have happened to that boy between his front door and that tap. And the whole neighborhood lived outdoors in the summer, on the front stoops and the back steps and out in the alleys. The alley was the children's kingdom. That's where the games were, the ball off the garage door, the whole secret geography of a kid's summer. The mothers sat out front and watched the street and knew every soul that passed and whose child was whose. The old men sat in the shade with a beer and settled the affairs of the world. The iceman still came in those years, hauling his block up the steps with the tongs, and the children trailed his wagon for the chips. Somebody's radio was going in a window, somebody's sprinkler was going in a yard, and every kid on the block found his way to it. And when the streetlights came on, that was the whole clock a child needed. The mothers' voices went up and down the block calling the names, and it was over, and there'd be another one just like it tomorrow. Now let's go downtown a little, over to a street the whole city knew, Old World 3rd Street. That was the German downtown, the old country's own block, and it was one of the great smells of the city all by itself. Because right there stood Usinger's, Fred Usinger's sausage, made on that street since 1880, out of a fine 6-story brick factory. And inside was a shop full of every kind of sausage a German mind ever conceived. The bratwurst and the knockwurst and the liverwurst, the summer sausage, the Braunschweiger, the ring bologna, the smoked and the fresh and the cured, hanging in ropes behind the counter, and men in white coats and paper hats slicing it out for you and passing a taste across the case to a child on his mother's arm. Old country recipes, made by hand, on the same block, for 70-odd years and counting. And up the way there was Mader's for the sauerbraten and the schnitzel, with the beer steins and the old-world dark wood, where a family went for a special Sunday. That street smelled of smoke and spice and old wood and beer, and it was as German as anything left standing in America. And you'd take that sausage home, and here's what you did with it. And if you're from that town, I don't have to tell you, but I'm going to say it anyway because it's the truth, and it matters. You did not just throw a bratwurst on the grill like some barbarian from another state. No, sir. You got a pan, and you filled it with beer, good beer, and there was no other kind there. And you sliced up onions into it, and you set that pan on the edge of the grill, and you let those brats simmer in the beer and the onions, slow, until they were plump and cooked clean through. And only then did they go over the coals to take the char and the snap. And then they went into a hard roll with more onions and a stripe of brown mustard, and there was never a finer thing eaten in an American backyard, and there never will be. The whole block smelled of it on a Saturday. The whole city smelled of it. Beer and onions and smoke drifting over every fence in Milwaukee on a summer afternoon. That and the malt from the breweries. And if you could bottle those two smells together, you'd have the whole decade in a jar. And when the sun went down and the heat still sat on the pavement, there was one place every child in that city dragged his family, and every teenager took his girl. And it was not an ice cream stand. Don't you say ice cream in Milwaukee. This was frozen custard, and it is not the same thing. And a Milwaukeean will explain the difference to you at length and with feeling. It's the egg yolk and the slow churn and the low air. It comes out dense and cold and satiny, smooth as anything you've ever put in your mouth. And it's made fresh in small batches through the day and served soft right there. And it does not sit in a freezer for a week. And this town went absolutely mad for it. Paul Giles built his little stand out on West Blue Mound Road back in 1938. And his night manager, a fellow named Leon Schneider, went off 4 years later and opened Leon's over on 27th Street. And those two stands are still standing and still arguing about it to this day. And they were only the beginning. Milwaukee has to this hour more frozen custard stands per head than any place on the face of the earth. The unofficial frozen custard capital of the world. And on a hot summer night, the line would run clear down the block, the neon buzzing, the cars pulled in, the whole family standing there in the warm dark, with a cone going soft, faster than a child could eat it, the chocolate and the vanilla and the flavor of the day. And it was a nickel or a dime's worth of pure happiness, and about as good as being alive ever got. And for the grown folks, before the supper, there was one more thing, and it is the most Wisconsin thing in this entire episode, the old-fashioned. Now, everywhere else in this country, an old-fashioned is made with whiskey, bourbon, or rye, and that's the drink. Not here. In Wisconsin, an old-fashioned is made with brandy, and they'll muddle the sugar and the bitters and the orange slice and the cherry right there in the glass, and pour the brandy over it, and top it with soda, sweet or sour or press. And you had better know which one you want before the bartender asks. And how in the world did a whole state come to drink its old-fashions with brandy? Because the German folks who built that place went down to the World's Fair in Chicago in 1893 and tasted the California brandy they were pouring there, and liked it so well they took it home with them and never let it go. A drink order at a Wisconsin supper club that traces straight back to a World's Fair in the last century. That's how deep the old country ran in that town. And that drink belonged to a whole institution the rest of the country has never quite understood, the Wisconsin Supper Club. Not a restaurant exactly, a supper club. You'd drive out to it, often enough out of town away, and there'd be the dim bar with the fish on the wall and the Friday crowd 3 deep, and you'd have your brandy old-fashioned standing right there and greet half the people you knew. And then they'd seat you, and out came the relish tray, the celery and the carrot sticks and the radishes and the pickled things in their little compartments, free, before you'd even ordered. And then the prime rib or the walleye or the steak, and a baked potato the size of your fist, and the whole family taking 2.5 hours over it, and nobody rushing anybody anywhere. That was Saturday night. That was about as fancy as most folks ever needed to get. And it was plenty fancy, and it was theirs. Now let's walk it off, up into the downtown proper, up Wisconsin Avenue with the big department stores and the plate glass and the crowds. The streetcars were still running in those years, clanging along their rails, though their days were numbered, and the buses and the automobiles were already crowding them out. There were the great stores where a family did its shopping, and a lady wore her gloves to do it. There was the movie palace. There was the Milwaukee River running right through the middle of it all, with the bridges swinging open for the boats. It was a handsome, solid, brick and stone kind of downtown, built by people who meant to stay, with nothing flashy about it, and everything sturdy, which was, come to think of it, exactly what the town was like. And running right through the middle of that downtown was the river, the Milwaukee River, brown and working, with the freighters and the barges coming up it from the lake, and the bridges swinging open sideways to let them through. So the traffic stopped, and the whole street stood there waiting, and nobody minded a bit. Downtown had the office buildings and the courthouse and the newspapers and the crowds at noon. It had the taverns for the businessmen and the lunch counters and the shoeshine stands. And up on the hill, it had the great domed county courthouse and the city hall, with its tower that had been for a while one of the tallest things in America. Solid, German, built to last. That was the whole idea of that town, in brick and stone. Don't be flashy, be sturdy, and still be standing in 100 years. And at the end of the street, always in that city, at the end of the street, there was the lake. Lake Michigan, sitting right there, an inland sea so big you couldn't see across it. And on the hottest afternoon of August, when the pavement was soft and the brewery smell hung heavy and nobody could sleep, that lake would send its cool breath up the streets from the east, and the whole city would sigh. That was the gift of it. You'd walk down toward the lakefront in the evening, down through the parks they'd laid out along the water, and it would get 10 degrees cooler with every block. And there'd be families spread out on the grass, and the band playing in a shell somewhere, and the water going from blue to gray to silver as the light left it, and the whole hot, happy town coming down to the shore to cool off and watch the day end. And those parks along the water were no accident either. Hold on to that, because we'll come back around to it on our last day. Somebody had planned them. Somebody had decided on purpose that the shore of that lake was going to belong to everybody in that city and not to a row of private mansions, and had laid out mile after mile of green park along the water, with the paths and the bandstands and the beaches free and open to any soul who cared to walk down to them. There were band concerts in the summer evenings, the brass playing out over the water and the families on their blankets. There was Bradford Beach, packed on a hot Saturday, the whole city in the water. There were the picnics and the horseshoes and the softball games going till dark. A working family in that town, with no money at all to its name, had a lakefront to spend its summer on, And that, as we'll see, was the whole philosophy of the place, laid out in 1 green mile. Do you remember a whole city that smelled like it was brewing something good? A place with a tavern on every corner, and a church steeple over every neighborhood, and a pail of beer coming home in a boy's 2 hands. Most of it's gone now, or changed past knowing, but it was as real as the pavement, and for 1 long decade, it was about as warm and as whole a place as this country ever built. Rest here a minute in that lake breeze, with the custard going soft and the malt on the air. Because tomorrow we're going out to the ballpark, and I have got to tell you about what happened to this town when the Braves came to Milwaukee. Now I have to tell you a love story, because that's what it was. There's no other honest word for it. And it happened to that whole city all at once, in the spring of 1953. And if you were there, you have never gotten over it. And if you weren't, you need to hear it. Because there has never been anything quite like it in the history of American sport. Milwaukee did not have a big league ball club, understand that first. It was a big, proud, hard-working city, the beer capital of the world, and it had never once had a major league team, and it had wanted one, quietly and hungrily, for 50 years. And then, on the 18th of March in 1953, the Boston Braves, a tired old ball club in a town that had stopped caring about them, packed up and moved to Milwaukee. The first big league franchise to pull up stakes and move in half a century. 50 years, and no team had budged, and now one was coming here. And this town came absolutely unglued. They came in on the train. And when that train pulled in, there were people at the station, and then all down the road. And by the time the motorcade started rolling, somewhere between 60 and 80,000 human beings were lined up along a 5-mile route from the depot through the downtown, hollering their lungs out at a ball club that had not yet played 1 single inning for them. 60,000 people, for a team they'd never seen, standing on the curbs and hanging out the office windows and waving from the rooftops in the cold March air, weeping, some of them, because the big leagues had finally come to Milwaukee, and it was really happening, and it was theirs. And then the town started giving them things. That's the part that gets me. The merchants of that city simply lost their heads with gratitude. They showered those ball players with gifts, everything from free dry cleaning to, this being Milwaukee, free beer. A player could hardly pay for a thing in that town. They gave them so much that the league eventually had to have a word about it. Think about what that means. A whole city so grateful that a ball club had merely agreed to live there that it tried to pay them in kindness. And in the middle of April, they opened County Stadium, a brand new ballpark, built and waiting, with the ceremonies and the bands and the civic pride running about a foot deep. And the Braves went out and won the thing in extra innings, because of course they did. That's how the whole affair started. And that first summer, in Boston's last year, that same ball club had drawn barely 280,000 people through the gates for a whole season. That first summer in Milwaukee, better than 1,800,000 came. Better than 1,800,000. 6 times the crowd for the same 9 men 600 miles west, because here they were wanted. And it didn't cool off. It got worse, or better, depending how you look at it. Within a few years, that ball club was packing over 2 million people a year into County Stadium. And no National League team in the history of the game had ever drawn 2 million. Not the Dodgers in Brooklyn, not the Giants, nobody. A middling-sized brewery town out on the lake was outdrawing New York City. The players said later they'd never known anything like it and never would again. The way that town treated them, the way the crowd loved them, the way you could not buy a beer in Milwaukee in a Braves uniform because somebody had already bought it for you. The ball players themselves never got over it. They'd come from Boston, where they'd played in front of rows of empty green seats and nobody much knew their names. And now they could not walk down Wisconsin Avenue without being stopped every 10 feet. They said it for the rest of their lives, every one of them. That Milwaukee in those years was the finest place a ball player ever played. Not for the money, there wasn't any money to speak of then, but for what it felt like to be wanted that badly by a whole city. Some of those men moved their families there and never left. Some of them are buried there. That's what that town did to people. It loved you so hard you stayed. So let's go on out to the ballpark on a warm summer night, because this is where the whole city was. The cars nose to tail on the way out, the whole family in them, the lot filling up. And out in that lot, the tailgate, which they will tell you Milwaukee invented, and I am not going to argue about it. The trunk open, the little grill going, the brats simmering in a pan of beer and onions right there on the asphalt. The smoke rolling across the whole parking lot, so the entire ballpark smelled of beer and onions and char before you ever got through the turnstile. Everybody had a beer. Everybody. This was Milwaukee. The beer flowed at that ballpark like the lake was made of it, and it was their own, brewed a mile or two up the road, and drinking a Milwaukee beer at a Milwaukee ball game was very nearly a civic sacrament. And County Stadium itself was a plain, honest, unpretty ballpark, and the town loved it exactly the way you love a good, sturdy thing. It sat out west of downtown in a hollow with the parking all around it. And it had none of the ivy and none of the poetry of the old eastern parks. It was new, and it was concrete. And it had been built in a hurry, because a city that had waited 50 years was not going to wait one more. But it had that green in it, and it had 50,000 of your neighbors in it. And on a summer night, with the lights up and the flags out and the smell of the brats drifting in over the wall from the lot, there was not a finer place to be in the state of Wisconsin. And inside that green, you'd come up the ramp out of the dark concourse, and there it would be, that first look, the way it always is. The impossible green of the grass under the lights, the infield dirt raked into arcs, the flags, the 50,000 people, the noise, and the sound of a ballpark in the 50s, the vendors calling, the crack of the bat that you could hear clear up in the top rows, the organ and the crowd, one great animal breathing in and out together. And out there on that grass in those years, Milwaukee had itself some ball players. Warren Spahn on the mound with that high kick, the winningest left-hander who ever lived. Eddie Matthews at third with that beautiful swing. Lou Burdette, Del Crandall. And out in right field, come the summer of 1954, a quiet, skinny 20-year-old from Alabama with the fastest wrists God ever gave a man, Henry Aaron, Hank Aaron. He came up that year and he stayed, and this town got to watch him become what he became. And going to a ball game in those years was a plain, cheap, unhurried thing. You bought a scorecard for a nickel and kept the score yourself, in pencil. Inning by inning, because that's what a person did. The vendors came up the aisles hollering, the beer man, the peanut man, the fellow with the hot dogs, and you passed your coins hand to hand down a whole row of strangers, and the change came back, and not 1 cent of it ever went missing. The ushers wore uniforms and called your father Sir. The kids brought their gloves and hung over the rail during batting practice, hollering for a ball. There were double headers on a Sunday, 2 games, 1 ticket, a whole day of it, the sun going around the sky while you sat there, and you'd come home sunburnt and hoarse and perfectly happy. It cost about what a working man could spare on a Sunday. Everybody could go, so everybody went. And then came 1957. That's the year, that's the summer that whole city would spend the rest of its life talking about. The Braves took the pennant and went to the World Series against the New York Yankees, the great Yankees, the machine that had rolled over everybody for a decade. And Milwaukee beat them in 7 games. Burdette threw 3 complete games and shut them out in the 7th. And Hank Aaron hit .393 in that series with 3 home runs. When it ended, that city, that brewery town nobody east of Chicago took seriously, was the champion of the whole world. And it was the first championship any Milwaukee team had ever won in anything. They poured out into the streets. The taverns emptied and the streets filled and the horns went all night long. And grown men stood on the corner and cried and hugged strangers. Little Milwaukee beat the Yankees. If you were 10 years old in that town in that October, you have never once in your life been that happy again, and you know it. They had a parade for them, of course, and the whole town came out again the way it had that first March, only louder. And for years after, you could not walk into a tavern in that city without somebody putting that seventh game on the jukebox of his own memory and playing it back through, pitch by pitch, for whoever would sit still and listen. Milwaukee had been the little brother of American cities its whole life, the sturdy, unglamorous, hard-working place that nobody ever made a picture about. And for one autumn it stood on top of the whole world. It never once forgot the feeling. And even if you couldn't get out to the park, and most nights most folks couldn't, you had the game anyway, because that ball club came out of every radio in the city. Every radio. You could walk down a block on a summer evening and never miss a pitch. It was coming out of the tavern door on the corner, out of the open window of the house on the left, off the porch on the right where the old man had his set on the railing, out of the car at the light, out of the kitchen while your mother did the dishes. The whole town listened to the same game at the same time, all summer long, and you could tell what had just happened by the sound the neighborhood made. That's a thing that's gone now. And I don't know that it's coming back. A whole city, all together, all at once, holding its breath over the same thing. And that summer the whole town played too. Every vacant lot and every schoolyard and every alley had a game going in it. Kids with a taped ball and a bat somebody's brother had left behind. All of them being Aaron, all of them being Spawn. The games running until it was too dark to see and then a good while longer. The fathers coached the Little League teams that the taverns and the plants sponsored, the name across the back of the shirt the same name that was on the tavern sign or the factory gate. Baseball wasn't something that town watched. It was the thing that town did, from the day the snow went off the ground until the day it came back. Now let's leave the ballpark and go do the other great Milwaukee thing, the thing folks came from all over the country to do. Take a brewery tour. Because the great breweries, Schlitz and Pabst and Miller and Blatz, threw their doors open to the public, free, and walked you right through the whole business. And what a thing it was. You'd go through those great brick halls with the enormous copper kettles, gleaming like something out of a cathedral, and the steam and the smell of the mash, so thick and sweet it made you dizzy. Past the vats you could have drowned a house in, down into the cool cellars, out to the bottling line where the bottles went by in a river with that racket of glass on glass. And the fellow leading you telling it all in a patter he'd given 4 times a day for 15 years. And then, this is the part everybody remembers, at the end of the tour, they took you into the hospitality room. And in the hospitality room, they poured you beer, free beer, as much of it as you cared to sit and drink, fresh as it ever gets, right there where it was made, in a hall with long tables and pretzels, and a fellow at the tap who did not count. And for the children, root beer in their own little glasses. So the kids came out of it just as happy as their fathers. A family outing that ended with the old man 3 beers to the good, and the kids sticky with root beer. And it did not cost 1 dime. That was Milwaukee. That was how a town that made beer said hello. And you're left with something besides, the little souvenir glass, or the paper hat, or a bag of the pretzels, or just the story. Folks came from all over the country to take that tour, and went home and told about it. The copper, the smell, the free glass at the end. It was the finest advertising ever devised. And it never felt like advertising for 1 single second, because it wasn't a pitch, It was a town showing you its work and then handing you a glass of it. A city proud enough of the thing it made to throw the doors open and let anybody at all walk through and see exactly how it was done. There's a lesson buried in that somewhere, and I think it's this. They were not ashamed of the work. They wanted you to see it. And those breweries had been at it a long while, mind. They'd had their own beer gardens out under the trees since the last century, and their own taverns and inns and halls. The beer wasn't a product they sold you at arm's length. It was the town's own hospitality, and they poured it like it. And a beer garden on a Sunday afternoon was the whole German idea, right out under the trees. The long tables, and the band up on the little stand playing the old tunes, and the men with their glasses arguing about the ball club, and the women at the tables with the babies, and the children tearing around underfoot with nobody watching them and everybody watching them. 3 generations at the one table, out in the shade, the whole afternoon, over a few beers and a plate of sausage. Nobody got ugly. Nobody had to. It was a family place, and the whole notion behind it was that a man's pleasure and a man's people belonged in the same spot at the same time. That was Gemütlichkeit, with a bandstand. Now, the other religion. Bowling. And I mean religion. Milwaukee was the bowling capital of America, not by boast, by fact. And it was not a sport out there. It was the structure of the whole week. There were leagues on top of leagues, the tavern leagues, the church leagues, the ladies' leagues, and above all, the plant leagues, because the big factories, Alice Chalmers, Briggs and Stratton, bankrolled enormous bowling leagues for their own workers, hundreds of teams, whole tournaments. Your shirt had the tavern's name on the back in chain stitch, or the foundry's, and you wore it with more pride than a man ought to admit to. Monday was league night, and you did not schedule anything else on a Monday. And the alleys were everywhere, because the taverns had them, right in the back, a couple of lanes behind the bar with a boy setting the pins by hand, so a man could have a beer and roll a game without ever putting his coat on. Schlitz worked that out early and put lanes right in its own saloons, which is about the most Milwaukee sentence in this whole episode. Sell more beer by giving the men something to do between beers. And the matches were on the television by the 50s, and the local bowlers were genuine local heroes, known by name in every tavern in town. The rumble of the ball down the wood and the crack of the pins coming up through the floor of a corner tavern on a Monday night. That's the sound of that city as much as the ball game is. And down at the end of those tavern lanes there'd be a boy, the pin boy, sitting up on a little perch above the pit. And every time you rolled, he'd hop down and set the pins by hand and roll your ball back down the rail and hop up out of the way again, all night long, for a few coins and whatever the league men felt like leaving him. That was a job a Milwaukee kid could get at 12 years old. And league night was a whole ceremony. The same 4 men every Monday for 20 years, the same lane, the shirts, the beer, the arguing, and the trophy up on the back bar that the tavern was prouder of than anything else in the building. The women had their leagues too, on their own nights, and were every bit as fierce about it. A tavern's whole social year, the banquet, the tournament, the standings taped up by the register, ran on it. Bowling is what that town did with its winters and its Mondays, and a fair piece of its heart. And there was a whole other music in that town on a Saturday night, up on the near north side, and it deserves better than to be a footnote. Bronzeville, Walnut Street. That was the heart of Black Milwaukee, the neighborhood the Great Migration had built, the shops and the churches and the barber shops and the clubs. And on a weekend night, Walnut Street swung. The clubs up there brought in the finest musicians in America. Duke Ellington played Walnut Street. Louis Armstrong played Walnut Street. Billie Holiday sang up there, along with the local players who were every bit as good and whose names never got out of the city. The horns came out the doors into the summer night, and the street was dressed to the nines and alive till 2 in the morning. That was Milwaukee too. The same summer, the same town, a mile from the brewery. And a whole lot of white Milwaukee never once came up to hear it, which was their loss, and a bigger one than they knew. And the ones who did come up got a night they never forgot, because Walnut Street on a Saturday dressed. The men in their good suits and their good hats, the women turned out beautiful, and the clubs packed and hot and blue with smoke, and the music going till the small hours, the touring names when they came through, and the local players every night of the week, and the jam sessions after the paying crowds went home, which is where the real playing happened. It was a whole city inside the city, its own businesses, its own newspaper, its own churches, its own doctors, its own deep pride, built by people who had come up out of the South looking for a factory job and a life, and had made both, and then made all this on top of it. Hold that street in your mind a minute. Remember what it sounded like. We are going to have to come back to Walnut Street before we're through, and it will not be easy when we do. And there was the plain old rest of it, the ordinary summer joys. The lakefront on a hot Saturday, Radford Beach packed shoulder to shoulder, the whole town in the water. The band concerts in the parks in the evening, the church festivals with the Wheel of Chance and the beer tent, the polka halls where the accordion went all night, and the old folks and the young ones danced the same steps. And down at the show house on a Saturday afternoon, the marquee with a Western up on it, a John Wayne picture, the Duke riding tall while a theater full of Milwaukee kids sat in the cool dark with their popcorn and hollered him on. And there were the polka halls, which is a thing a person really had to see. The accordion and the concertina and the horns going, and the floor full, and hardly a soul on it under 60 or over 10, because the grandparents danced, and the little ones danced, and the teenagers rolled their eyes and danced anyway, the same steps their great-grandparents had danced in a village on the other side of the ocean. And the church festivals, every parish in its turn all summer long, the whole neighborhood out in the schoolyard under the strung lights, the Wheel of Chance, the raffle, the ladies' bake table, the beer tent, because of course there was a beer tent. It was a Catholic parish in Milwaukee, and the priest walking around in his shirt sleeves with a plate of food in his hand, blessing everybody. Nobody in that town needed to leave it to have a summer. The summer came to your corner. So that was where the fun was, in Milwaukee in the 50s. A ball club the whole town was in love with, a free glass of beer at the end of a brewery tour, a pair of lanes behind the corner tavern, a horn on Walnut Street, and the lake to cool it all down. Let the night come. Let the lights go down over County Stadium and the crowd file out talking, the last brats coming off the grills in the lot, the radios going quiet one by one down every street. It had been a good day in the best-fed, best-beered, happiest town in America. Tomorrow we'll go and see what paid for it all. But tonight that crowd is still roaring, and the Braves are still ours, and it is still 1957, and we are still champions of the world. So come back with me now, and come back early. Back before the ballpark fills and the tour buses roll up and the tavern lights come on. Back into the dark of 4 in the morning, because all of that fun we just had was paid for, every glass of it. Somebody made that beer. Somebody built those machines. And in a town like that one, damn near everybody's father was up in the dark putting on his boots. That's the town we're going to walk today. That's the one that doesn't get the songs. And it starts, the way everything in Milwaukee starts, with the smell of the malt. Because the breweries never slept, not ever. Come down past those great brick castles at 4 in the morning, and every window's burning, and the stacks are going, and the whole works is humming away in the dark, the way it had been all night and would be all day. Brewing is not a thing you can start and stop. The mash has to be watched, the temperature held, the yeast tended like a living thing, which is exactly what it is. So there were men in there in the middle of the night, in the heat and the steam, minding it. Walk in with the first shift and see what that work actually was. It was hot, and it was wet, and it was heavy. There were the malt houses, with the grain and the dust of it in the air till a man's lungs learned to live with it. There was the brew house, the great copper kettles 2 stories tall, gleaming and steaming, and the brewers on the catwalks above them in the wet heat, watching the boil, the way their fathers had taught them. Because a good many of these men were the sons and grandsons of men who'd done the same job in the same room. It was a trade, and it was handed down. There were the cellars, cold, dripping, dark, cavernous, where the beer lay aging in its tanks, and men in rubber boots and heavy coats worked in a chill that got into your bones and stayed there, and where you went from 100-degree brew house down to 40 degrees in a stairwell twice a shift all your working life. And over all of it stood the brewmaster, and in Milwaukee that was very nearly a priesthood. He was almost always German or German-trained, and he had served his years, and he knew the whole thing in his hands and his nose and his tongue. The water, the malt, the hops, the yeast, and the 1,000 small decisions that made this brewery's beer taste like this brewery's beer and not the one down the street. Those recipes were held like scripture. The yeast was guarded like the family silver. A brewery's yeast strain was its soul, kept alive year after year, generation after generation, a living thing handed down. And the men under him took it every bit as seriously. They were not making a commodity, they were making Milwaukee's beer, and the whole country was going to drink it, and it had better be right. There's a pride in that you cannot buy and cannot fake. And there was the bottling line, which was a whole world of its own noise. The bottles coming down the belt in a river, thousands upon thousands an hour. Glass knocking on glass, and a racket you had to shout through. The fillers and the cappers and the labelers going. And the women, a great many of them women, standing at the line inspecting every bottle as it went by against a light, hour after hour, catching the flaw, pulling the bad one, 10,000 times a day. And there were the coopers, still, in those years, making and mending the wooden barrels, one of the oldest crafts on earth, working away in a corner of the 20th century. And out on the loading docks, the teamsters, wrestling the kegs and the cases onto the trucks that fanned out at dawn to fill every one of those thousands of taverns we walked past yesterday. The whole town's thirst, met by hand every single day by men who'd started at 4. And there were still, in those years, the wagons and the great draft horses on the close-in routes. The breweries had kept their teams out of pure sentiment and good advertising, and a boy on the north side could still see a 6-horse hitch come clopping down his street with a load of barrels, the harness jingling, the driver up top like a king. The routes fanned out at dawn, to the thousands of taverns, to the ballpark, to the beer gardens, to the groceries. Every corner in that city got its delivery, every week, the same day, from the same man, who knew the barkeep's name and the barkeep's kids' names, and rolled the empties out and the fulls in and was gone before the lunch crowd. The whole town's thirst on a schedule, like the mail. And here's a thing that would make an office in any other industry faint. The brewery workers drank on shift. It was in the deal. There was beer available to the men who made it, right there, all day. A brewery that made a man work in that heat and did not give him a glass of what he was making would have had a riot on its hands, and every brewery knew it. They drank, and they worked, and the work got done, and the beer that came out of those halls was the best in the country, and everybody in the country knew it. It was a different age, and I'm not going to sit here and tell you it was better or worse. I'm just telling you how it was. And the scale of it, you have to hear the numbers because they're not small. In 1950, Schlitz was the biggest brewer in the entire United States of America. Pabst was 4th, Miller was 8th, Blatz was 9th. 4 of the 9 biggest breweries in this whole country, all of them in one middling city on one lake. Schlitz alone shipped better than 5 million barrels of beer that year. And in 1952, that one brewery set a world record, 6 1/3 million barrels out of a single company in a single year, which was more beer than it had made in the first 44 years of its existence, all of them put together. Read that again. In 1 year, they outbrewed their own first 44. That is what a boon looks like from the inside, and Milwaukee was living in the middle of one, and every family on the north side had somebody drawing a check from it. Now, I have to put one small cloud in this bright sky, because it's true, and because it turned out to matter. In the summer of 1953, the same spring the Braves came, the very same year that town fell in love, all 6 of the city's breweries went out on strike. 76 days. 76 days with the lines standing silent, the men out on the sidewalk with their signs, the kettles cold. And in those 76 days, out in St. Louis, Anheuser-Busch kept right on brewing and slipped past Schlitz and took the national crown. Just like that. The beer that made Milwaukee famous was, for the first time anybody could remember, not number 1 anymore. Now, nobody in that town in 1953 thought they were watching the beginning of anything. It was a labor fight. The men wanted their share of a boom that everybody could see, and they were not wrong to want it. And eventually it was settled, and the lines started up again, and the town went back to its ball games. But looking back from here, you can see it, can't you? The first hairline crack in a thing everybody thought was solid granite. Hold that thought. We'll want it on our last day. And a word about those men out on the sidewalk with their signs, because it belongs in this story. That town was union to the bone. The breweries, the plants, the foundries, the trades, and the union hall was very nearly as much a part of a man's life as the parish and the corner tavern. It wasn't ideology, it was arithmetic. The boom was enormous, and everybody could see it. And the men doing the lifting wanted a fair piece of it for their families. And so they organized, and they argued, and now and then they walked. And mostly, in that decade, they won. That is where the little house and the 4 children and the ball game tickets actually came from. Not out of anybody's generosity. Out of men standing together in the street for 76 days in 1953. Now let's leave the beer and walk across town, because Milwaukee made a great deal more than beer. And the second most famous thing that ever came out of that city was born in a backyard. Juneau Avenue. Back in 1903, in a shed out behind the Davidson family's house, a shed 10 by 15 feet with the name painted on the door by the boy's sister, a young fella named Bill Harley and the Davidson brothers built themselves a motorcycle. And in the 50s, half a century on, Harley-Davidson was still on that same ground, same street. The company had grown up around that backyard until the plant filled the blocks, and they were building the big twins that the whole country rode, the police department's bikes, the highwaymen's bikes, the machines the returning GIs had come home wanting. And inside that plant it was the sound of a real machine shop. The presses, the lathes, the grinders, the hammer of metal, the men in aprons with their hands black to the wrist, building an engine one piece at a time. That's a Milwaukee story if there ever was one. 2 boys in a shed in the backyard, and 50 years later the whole world knows the name. and they never once moved off the block they started on. And they were beautiful machines, and the town knew it. The big twins with that deep, uneven, unmistakable heartbeat of an engine. You could hear a Harley coming 4 blocks off and know exactly what it was without ever looking up. Half the police departments in America rode them. The state troopers rode them. And after the war, the young men came home with a taste for something loud and free, and the clubs formed, and the riders came up out of the neighborhoods, and on a Sunday you'd see them roll out along the lake in a pack with the sun coming off the chrome. And that little wooden shed, the original one, 10 feet by 15, with the name hand-painted on the door, the company kept it, moved it, minded it, treasured it, because they knew exactly what it was. A shed in a backyard, out of which came a sound the whole world would come to recognize. And Harley was only one shop among hundreds, because here's the title that town wore before it ever wore the beer crown: the machine shop of the world. That's what they called Milwaukee, and they meant it literally. This was a city that made the machines that made everything else. Out in West Allis, there was Allis Chalmers, an enormous works, acres of it, thousands upon thousands of men, turning out the tractors that farmed the country and the great turbines and generators that ran the power plants. There was A.O. Smith, whose plant stamped out the steel frames that damn near every automobile in America was built on, one every few seconds, a mile of them a day. There was Briggs and Stratton, making the little engines that turned the lawnmowers of the whole nation. There were the foundries, pouring iron, the sand and the smoke and the orange light of a pour lighting up a man's face at midnight. There were machine tool shops and pattern shops and forges, hundreds of them, big and small, tucked into the valley and along the river, making the dies and the gears and the castings and the precise, unglamorous, absolutely essential pieces that the rest of American industry could not run 1 hour without. Take Allis Chalmers, out in West Allis, a whole town named for the works, which tells you the size of the thing. It sprawled over acres and acres, and it employed thousands upon thousands of men. So many that entire neighborhoods grew up around its gates, and whole streets went to work on the same whistle. They built the orange tractors that farmed half this country, and they built the great turbines and generators, machines as big as houses, months in the making, that went out and made the electricity for cities on the other side of the world. Think of that a moment. A fellow off the south side of Milwaukee, with a lunch pail and a bus transfer, spending his year building a turbine that would light up a country he could not have found on a map. Or take A.O. Smith, whose great plant was one of the mechanical wonders of the age. They made the steel frames that American automobiles were built on, and they made them on a machine so vast and so automated and so clever that people came from all over the world just to stand and watch it work. The steel going in at the one end and a finished car frame coming off the other, one every few seconds, hour after hour, better than a mile of them a day. Every few seconds, another frame, another car, another American family's Sunday drive. That was Milwaukee's hand in the whole automobile age, and hardly a soul outside that town ever knew the name. And the foundries, that was the hot end of the whole business. Pouring iron is about the closest thing to standing next to the sun that a working man ever does. The cupola charged, the metal running molten and white-orange, the ladle swinging over, the sparks going up in a fountain, and the heat coming off it in a wall you could lean against. The men wore leathers, and the sweat never dried on them the whole shift long. It burned you, sooner or later. Every foundry man carried his marks. And out of that came the castings, the blocks and the housings and the gears that every machine in America was built out of. Nothing in this country turned without somebody in a place like that pouring the iron for it first. And for every one of those giants there were 100 little shops, a dozen men and a few lathes in a brick building down some side street, making the one part nobody else could make, to 1/1000th of an inch for whoever needed it. That was the real machine shop of the world. Not just the big names, but the hundreds of small, precise, family-owned shops tucked into every corner of that city, each one full of men who could look at a drawing and simply make the thing. A city of craftsmen. You could not have built modern America without them, and almost nobody has ever heard of a single one of them. And then there were the tanneries, and I'd be lying to you if I made that sound romantic. Milwaukee was one of the great leather towns of the world, and the tanneries ran down along the river in the valley, and they were the hardest work in the whole city, and everybody knew it. The hides came in raw. And what a tannery smelled like, well, everybody in that town knew that smell, and knew which way the wind was blowing by it. And the men who worked in it stood all day in the pits and the drums, in the lime and the acid and the wet, hauling hides, in a stink that got into their clothes and their hair and would not wash out. They came home smelling of it every night of their lives. It was the job you took because it was there and it paid, and a great many immigrant men came off the boat and went straight into it, and put their sons through school on it. And the sons went on to the machine shops and the breweries, and never once looked back at that river. There is no monument to those men anywhere. There ought to be. And who did all of it? Look at the names on the time cards, and you have the whole immigration of a century laid out in front of you. The Germans who'd come first and built the breweries, the Poles who filled the south side and the foundries, the Serbs and the Croatians and the Slovenes, the Italians out of the Third Ward. And after the war, more and more through the 50s, the men and women who had come up from Mississippi and Arkansas and Tennessee on the train, out of the cotton fields and into Bronzeville, looking for exactly the same thing every other wave had come looking for. A factory gate, a paycheck, a house, a future for the children. They got the gate, most of them, though they had to fight a good deal longer than anybody should have for the better jobs on the far side of it. That town's whole working class was built out of people who had come from somewhere else with nothing in their pockets, one wave after another, and every one of them doing the very same thing, taking the hard job so that the children would not have to. And down at the bottom of it all, the harbor, the lake boats coming in, the long, low freighters, hauling the coal and the ore and the grain and the salt, the cranes working, the longshoremen on the docks in every weather, the whole Great Lakes trade moving through that port. And the rail yards behind them, and the trucks, all of it feeding the plants and hauling away what the plants made. And it was never only the men, whatever the old pictures show you. The women were on those bottling lines by the thousand, inspecting and packing and labeling all day at a pace that would break your wrists. They were in the offices and the typing pools and on the switchboards. They were behind the counter of every shop on every corner and running the taverns alongside their husbands, and a good many of them running the taverns alone. They'd been in the plants during the war, doing the men's jobs and doing them just fine, and been sent home again after, and plenty of them had gone right back out to work anyway, because a family needed it. And on top of every bit of that, they ran the households, the cooking, the cleaning, the canning, the washing, the children. That was the other half of that town's labor, and there was never a whistle blown for it, nor a pension paid on it, nor a word about it in any newspaper. So picture the whole thing at once, at 7 in the morning. The malt smell over everything, the shift whistles going off all across the city one after another like a rough kind of music. The streetcars and the buses packed with men in work clothes with lunch pails. The great gates of Alice Chalmers and A.O. Smith swallowing thousands of them at a time. The foundry smoke going up, the tannery stink coming off the river, the copper kettles boiling on the north side, and the motorcycles rolling off Juneau Avenue. That was Milwaukee at work. That was the engine under every single thing we walked through these last 2 days, under the brats and the custard and the free beer at the end of the tour, and the 50,000 people out at County Stadium. Somebody's father paid for all of it, in the dark, with his hands. And it was union work, most of it, and hard won, and that mattered too. Because these were the men and women who'd fought for the 8-hour day and the safety rules, and the wage that could actually keep a family. And in that decade they had it, really had it, and it is worth saying out loud what that meant. A fellow with a strong back and no diploma at all could walk into a plant in that town at 18 and know with reasonable confidence that he could buy a little house and raise 4 children in it and take them to the ball game and put a Christmas under the tree and retire with something. On one paycheck, in one city, doing one job for 40 years for a company that would still be there when he was done. That was the deal in Milwaukee in the 50s. That was the whole quiet miracle of that decade, and it was built by those hands in those buildings, and folks have been trying to get it back ever since. And when the whistle blew at the end of the shift, the whole thing reversed. The gates opened, and the men poured back out, and the streetcars filled, and the streets went full. And a great many of those men stopped exactly where we started yesterday, at the corner tavern, 3 blocks from home, for one cold glass of the very thing half of them had spent the day making. The barkeep had it poured before the man was through the door. The talk was the ball game, and the shop, and the weather, and the kids, and then home to supper. Did you ever work a place your whole town could smell? A place where you made a real thing with your hands and could point at it out in the world and say, "That one's mine." A great many of us did once, in towns just like this one, and there was a dignity in it we have been careless with since. Let the second shift go in, and the light go long over the valley, and the smoke go pink. Tomorrow is Sunday, the day this hard-handed, beer-making, machine-building city put down its tools and turned toward the things it loved. And it's our last day. Rest a minute first, here at the gate, with the whistle still in your ears, and think kindly on those hands. So here we are, the last day. And it's a Sunday, because in a town like that one, it could not have been anything else. We've had the beer and the brats and the custard. We've stood in that ballpark with 50,000 people and watched a city lose its heart to a ball club. We've been down in the dark with the men who made it all. Now let's stand still on a summer Sunday and look at the soul of the place, what these people believed and what held them together. And then, gently, I've got some hard things to tell you, and we'll have to say goodbye. The bells started it. All across that city on a Sunday morning, from every neighborhood at once, the bells. And there were a great many of them, because a Milwaukee parish did not skimp on its church. Up on the German north side, the bells. Down on the Polish south side, the bells. Out of the Italian ward by the river, the bells. And the people came, on foot mostly, in their good clothes. The men uncomfortable and scrubbed in their one good suit. The women in their hats, the little girls in white, the old women in black with their rosaries already going. And the churches filled, not half filled, filled. Standing room at the back, 3 and 4 masses a morning to get everybody through. The whole city on a Sunday at church in the same hour. And then out onto the sidewalk afterward. And the whole business of the visiting. The men in a knot on the steps talking about the ball club before they'd got 20 feet from the altar. The women with the babies, everybody catching up on everybody, and nobody in any hurry at all to go home. Because the parish was the spine of a Milwaukee neighborhood, more than the ward, more than the block. It had the church and it had the school, and the school had the nuns, and the nuns had opinions and a ruler, and the absolute confidence of every parent within 6 blocks. Your whole life ran through those doors. You were baptized there. You made your first communion there in a white dress or a little suit with a photograph taken to prove it. You were confirmed there. You'd be married there. And one day your funeral mass would be said there by a priest who had known you since you were a baby. The parish had the festival, the raffle, the bingo, the sodality, the ball team. If you got into trouble, the parish knew before your mother did. If your family fell into worse trouble, food turned up at the door, and nobody ever said one word about where it came from. That's what a parish was. A whole social order fitted into 6 blocks, and it never cost anybody a dime. And after the Mass came the Sunday, which was its own institution. The stop at the bakery on the way home for the coffee cake, the whole block doing the same errand at the same hour. The big dinner in the middle of the afternoon, the roast, the potatoes, the sauerkraut or the dumplings or whatever the old country had handed down to that particular kitchen, with the grandmother at the stove refusing every offer of help, and 3 generations pulled up to a table with the leaf put in. And then the visiting, out to the porch, or over to the aunts, or down to the park, or out to the beer garden under the trees with the whole family, the entire afternoon, nobody looking at a clock. And the ball game on the radio underneath all of it, going in the background of the whole day, the way a fire goes. And every parish had its summer festival, and they took turns all season. So from June to September, there was always one going somewhere in that town. The schoolyard strung with lights, the wheel of chance clacking, the raffle for a ham or a car, the ladies' bake table, the polka band up on a flatbed, the kids running wild with a fistful of tickets, and the beer tent, always the beer tent, run by the fathers of the parish, with the pastor walking through in his shirt sleeves with a plate in his hand, blessing everybody and everything. Half the neighborhood worked it, and the whole neighborhood came, and the money went to fix the roof or buy the school a new boiler. It was church and carnival and block party all at once, and it never occurred to a soul that there was anything odd about that combination, because in Milwaukee, there wasn't. And there was one church down on the south side that I have to take you to because it says everything about those people, and it is the most extraordinary thing in this whole episode. The Basilica of St. Josaphat. You'd see it from a long way off across those flat streets of little frame houses. A dome you could not believe, huge, out of all proportion to the neighborhood around it. Like somebody had picked up a cathedral in Rome and set it down among the Polish flats. And here is how it got there. The parish was poor, immigrant poor, working men and women who had come over with nothing and had nothing now but their wages. And they wanted a church, not a nice church, a great one, a church worthy of God. And they could not afford so much as the stone. And then their priest heard that away down in Chicago they were tearing down the old federal building, the courthouse and the post office. And he went down there and he bought it. He bought the wreckage. 200,000 tons of stone and iron and marble for $20,000. And he had it hauled up to Milwaukee on 500 railroad flat cars. 500 flat cars. And the people of that parish, the laborers, the tannery men, the foundry men, coming off their own shifts, unloaded it and hauled it and cut it and dressed it and set it with their own hands on their own time for years. They built a cathedral out of a torn-down post office. And when it was done, it was so magnificent that in 1929, the Pope named it a basilica, the 3rd one in the whole United States of America. A Polish immigrants' church on the south side of a beer town, built out of Chicago's garbage by men who couldn't spell the word architecture. Now you tell me what people can do. Tell me what they can do when they've decided that something is worth it. And that same stubborn love of a thing worth doing ran all through the town's own halls. The Turner Societies, brought over from Germany a century before, the gymnasts, the drill floors, the halls where the men exercised and the boys were taught, and the whole membership argued about politics and then sang. The singing societies, where working men met on a Thursday night after their shift to sing the old choral pieces, in German, in 4 parts, because it was beautiful and because their fathers had. Picture that. A foundry man who could not have told you one word about music theory, standing in a hall in his shirt sleeves after 10 hours of pouring iron, singing a part he'd learned by ear from a man who'd learned it in the old country. That was a town where ordinary people made their own culture, at night, after work, for free, for love. And it never once occurred to a single one of them that it was remarkable. And then there was the other great ritual of that town's faith, and this one you could eat, the fish fry, Friday. Now it started as a religious thing, plain and simple. The Catholic Poles and the Catholic Germans who settled that whole state did not eat meat on a Friday. That was the rule. That was the observance. And so on Friday it was fish. And then, in the Prohibition years, when the taverns couldn't legally sell the one thing they existed to sell, a great many of them stayed open by putting out plates of fried fish instead. And a religious obligation quietly turned into the biggest party of the week. And it never turned back. By the 50s, Friday night in Milwaukee meant the fish fry, and everybody went. Everybody. The taverns and the church halls and the supper clubs and the legion posts, all of them packed every Friday, all year long. The fried perch or the cod, the potato pancake, the coleslaw, the rye bread and butter, the lemon, a pitcher of beer on the table and a brandy old-fashioned before it, and an accordion player going in the corner if it was a good place. Whole families, 3 generations at a long table. The whole town out at once on a Friday night, eating fish, because a bishop said so 400 years ago, and because it turned out to be a wonderful excuse to be together. That is the most Milwaukee thing that has ever happened. A rule about fasting became a feast. Only that town could have managed it. And a fish fry was a scene. You didn't get a reservation, you got in line. And the line went out the door and down the sidewalk, and you waited, and you didn't mind one bit, because half that line was people you knew. The tables were long, and you shared them with strangers who were not strangers by the end of the plate. The fish came out on an oval platter, too much of it, always too much, and the potato pancakes with the applesauce, and the coleslaw, and the rye bread and butter, and the whole table shouting over the accordion. Kids on cokes, Grandpa on his 3rd old-fashioned. The waitress who called every man honey and never wrote a single thing down. It was the most reliable happiness in that entire town. Every Friday, all year, forever, the same, and everybody in it together. Now let me tell you the thing about that city that nobody outside of it knows, and that I find, honestly, kind of beautiful. That town was run for most of the first 60 years of that century, and right straight through the decade we're walking, by socialists. I'll say it again because folks don't believe it. Milwaukee is the only big city in the history of the United States that ever elected socialist mayors, and it did it over and over. And the last of them, Frank Zeidler, was the mayor from 1948 clear to 1960. He was mayor for this whole shining decade. He was mayor when the Braves came. He was mayor when they won it all. And what a peculiar and wonderful man he was. He would not take a free cup of coffee, not a cup, because a cup of coffee is how it starts. He walked to work. He answered his own telephone. And if you were a citizen of that city with a complaint about your alley, you could get the mayor of Milwaukee on the line and he would listen to you. He read everything, wrote his own speeches, and lived on his salary in a plain house with a pile of children in it. He was a self-taught man with an enormous library who believed a city ought to be a decent place to raise a family, and that the whole job was to see that it was. He served 12 years and left office as poor as he came in. You may agree with that man's ideas or you may not, but I'd like somebody to tell me the last time a big American city had a mayor who wouldn't take the coffee. And here's the thing, and this is why I love it. They were not firebrands. They were not revolutionaries. The rest of the country called them the sewer socialists, and it was meant as a mockery. And they took the name and wore it proudly because it was accurate. What they were about was sewers, and water, and parks, and garbage pickup, and public health, and honest books, and clean streets, and a city government where a man could not buy a favor and nobody took a nickel under the table. That was the whole program. Make the city work for everybody in it, and don't steal. And it worked so well that other cities sent people to Milwaukee to study how it was done. The lakefront parks we walked through, the ones I told you to hold on to, those were theirs, laid out on purpose so that the finest thing that city had, that whole green shore, belonged to every working family in it, and not to a row of mansions. The water was clean. The public health service was known all over the country. The books balanced. Frank Zeidler wouldn't so much as take a free cup of coffee and famously walked to work. You didn't have to agree with a single one of that man's ideas to be proud of what that gave you. A town that simply worked, where the trash got picked up and the water was safe and the parks were beautiful and free and the government was honest as a hammer. That's not a political thing. That's a civic thing. And an old Milwaukeean will tell you about it to this day with a little glow. Because for one long stretch of years, their city was widely held to be the best run in America. And they knew it. And it wasn't bragging, it was just true. Gemütlichkeit isn't only a long table and a full glass. It's also the sewers working. It's a place taking decent care of its people without any fuss, because that's what a place is for. And that was the whole soul of that city when you put it all together. Work, real work with your hands that you were proud of. Family, and a table with the leaf in it. The parish, the tavern, the team. A beer with a man you'd known since the second grade. Modesty, a deep, almost stubborn refusal to put on airs, in a town that had every right to brag and mostly didn't. And taking care of your block, of your own, of the widow on the corner, of the sewers and the parks and the water, quietly, without a speech about it. They were not fancy people. They never once thought they were special. They just built a place where a working family could have a whole good life. And then they went ahead and lived in it, and enjoyed it, out loud, together, at a long table with the band playing. That's what that word means. That was the town. And now, my friends, I have to tell you the hard part. Sit with me a minute, because there's 3 of them, and they all landed inside of 20 years, and none of us saw a single one of them coming. Cast your mind back to that bright decade. It's a summer night in the 50s. The malt is on the air. The tavern on the corner is full, and the lanes in the back are rumbling. Out at County Stadium, 50,000 people are on their feet. Frank Zeidler's city is humming along like a good machine. Walnut Street is swinging. And every soul in that town would have told you, with total confidence, that this was simply how Milwaukee was, and how it would go on being. And none of them knew. The first one came for Walnut Street. Remember I told you we'd have to come back and that it wouldn't be easy? In the 60s, they decided to renew the city. That was the word they used, renewal. And they ran a freeway through the near north side, Interstate 43. And they ran it straight through the middle of Bronzeville, not around it, through it. The clubs where Ellington and Armstrong and Billie Holiday had played, the shops, the churches, the barber shops, the houses, the whole living, breathing, hard-won world that Black Milwaukee had built for itself out of nothing but grit and the Great Migration, bulldozed and paved and gone. Thousands of people scattered, their businesses simply erased. A community that had taken 40 years to build, wiped off the map in a few. And the piece of it that I cannot get past, and that we ought to say straight, the freeway system that did it was one that the good, honest, beloved mayor had begun. He meant well. Everybody meant well. They thought they were building the future, and they took a whole neighborhood's heart out to do it. And the people who lost the most were the people who'd had the least to start with. And it did not need to happen that way. That's not politics, that's just the truth. And Milwaukee is still living with it. The second one came for the beer. Remember that 76-day strike back in '53, that first hairline crack? It kept going, slowly at first, and then all at once. The national brands and the big money and the huge new plants elsewhere came for the old Milwaukee breweries, one by one. And one by one, those great brick castles went dark and went quiet. Blatz, Pabst, and in time even Schlitz. Schlitz, the biggest brewer in America. The beer that made Milwaukee famous, the words on every bottle and barn wall in this country, poured its last. Think of that. The town's own name, its whole identity. The smell on the morning air that every child there grew up inside of, gone quiet. There are folks in that city who will tell you the day the malt smell went away was the day the town stopped being itself. And the third one broke the heart. That ball club. The one this whole city fell in love with at a train station in 1953. The one 60,000 people lined 5 miles of street to holler at. The one they gave free dry cleaning and free beer to out of pure gratitude because it had agreed to live here. The one that drew $2 million a year when nobody in the National League ever had. The one that beat the New York Yankees in 7 games and made this little brewery town the champion of the whole world. After the 1965 season, the Braves packed up and went to Atlanta. Left. For a bigger market and a better deal. 12 years. That's all that town got. Milwaukee loved that ball club better than any city has ever loved a team. And it got 12 summers. And then they were gone. And the ballpark sat there empty. And a whole city that had learned how to be proud had to learn something else instead. Ask a Milwaukeean of a certain age about the Braves leaving. Watch what happens to his face. 60 years on. But they had no idea, not on that bright summer night, and thank God they didn't, because the not knowing is the whole mercy of it. It let them have it. It let them stand in that ballpark with a beer and a brat and 50,000 neighbors and be as purely, thoughtlessly happy as human beings get, without one eye on the door. They got that decade whole. Nobody can take a lived day back off you. Not a freeway, not a bulldozer, not a moving van, not 60 years. They had it. It was theirs. It still is. So let the evening come down now over Milwaukee, this one last time. Let the light go long and gold over the brick and the steeples and the stacks. Let the smell of the malt come drifting over the north side the way it did every night of every year for 100 years. Let the last brats come off the grills and the sprinklers tick off in the yards, and the children get called in off the alleys, name by name, up and down every block. Let the taverns fill and the lanes rumble in the back, and the ball game come out of every open window at once, all down the street, so a man can walk home and never miss a pitch. Let the lake send its cool breath up the streets one more time. Let the last call come at the corner tavern, the men finishing an argument they've been having since Tuesday, putting on their hats, saying goodnight to one another by name the way they have for 30 years. Let the barkeep wipe down the wood and turn out the sign and lock the door and walk the 2 blocks home himself, past the same houses, under the same trees, through the same warm, malt-smelling dark he has walked through every night of his life. Let the streetlights hum over the empty alleys. Let the last radio in the last kitchen go quiet. Let that whole big-hearted town lie down to sleep with the lake breathing beside it, and the smell of tomorrow's brewing already rising, and the first shift only a few hours off. And let that whole warm, loud, hard-working, well-run, beer-soaked, big-hearted city sit down at one long table together, Gemütlichkeit, the whole town of it, and not know a thing about what's coming, and be happy. I hope you had a place like that once. Maybe it was Milwaukee itself, and you were there, and you can still smell the malt on the morning and still hear that 7th game. Or maybe it was some other town that had a smell of its own, and a tavern on the corner, and a team that belonged to everybody. Some other place that was working and whole and yours, before the freeway came through, or the plant closed, or the club moved away. Tell me about it, down below, wherever you are tonight. Tell me what your town made, and what it smelled like, and what you'd give for one more Friday night at that long table. Leave it there for the rest of us to find. Because these things are worth remembering out loud, and worth remembering together. And the more of us who say them, the longer they last. Stay with us, and we'll keep walking the old country home, one good summer at a time. I'm Henry. I miss those days. The sweet old America.